We do have some histories in the aftermath of World War II, the aftermath of fascism in Italy, as well as in Germany. So this will be some historical perspectives in post-war Italy and a history for and of the new Germany. The first fascist country, Italy, entered World War II late and switched sides to join the Allies in 1943. Hence, the post-war debates were not primarily about the war guilt question, but on how fascism had gained power. Historians came closest to a war guilt debate in dealing with Mussolini's imperialistic foreign policy. In that, the alliance with Germany in 1938, that known as the Axis, came to play a significant role. All in all, post-fascist Italy's return to liberal parliamentary politics proved to be less complicated than that of Germany's. A brief revolutionary cleansing period had removed from public life the most crucial features and personalities of fascism. Italian historiography also experienced fewer problems in reestablishing the continuity between past and present that held true despite large-scale changes in economic and social structures. Continuity also marked historical practice and its theoretical base. While Benedetto Croce's influence was diminished, he had found able successors, among them Adolfo Amadeo. But as it had before, historicism coexisted with elements of social science, oriented and Marxist history. With the exception of the latter, Marxist history, continuity had not been radically broken, even under the fascist regime. After 1945, again after World War II and the part of the Reconstruction, one reminder of the break was the fact that few of the exiles returned, most notably the well-known Arnaldo Marmigliano and Franco Venturi. Confronting the 21-year fascist period, historians asked why Italian liberalism had yielded power so meekly in 1922. Among the frequently cited reasons were dissatisfaction with the Italian rewards in the peace treaties, fear of communism, and socialism's perceived insufficient nationalism. To that, Luigi Salvatorelli and Giovanni Mira added the impoverishment of the middle class. Marxist scholars cited Italian society's structural problems. The general inquiry also extended into the Risorgimento as the crucial period of modern Italian history. Did Cavour's solution prevail too completely over the populist ideals of Garibaldi? Delio Cantemoro and Marxist historians, especially Antonio Gramsci, would regret the absence of a Jacobin radical period in the Risorgimento. They pointed to Italy's insufficient modernization. In contrast, Rosario Romano pointed out the detrimental effect such a radical phase would have had. Others, like Gaetano Salvemini, rejected the proposition of a weak liberalism altogether. In the lively discussion on the nature of fascism, Croce suggested that fascism had no Italian roots, but was a foreign ideological import. Those in agreement stressed fascism's connection to international socialism and syndicalism. But Renzo de Felice saw fascism as a nationalist Italian movement that only through its dictatorship resulted in discontinuity. Fascism also lacked a systematic ideology beyond the idea of a corporate economic order. The nationalist glorification of ancient Rome and that of the Renaissance, imperialism, and the celebration of the great individual, especially that of the leader Mussolini. Hence, the term fascism should not be extended to Hitler's movement. Indeed, De Felice and Federico Chabad saw Mussolini's pact with Hitler in 1938 as the fatal turning point in his career. Being against Italian interests, it destroyed the loose consensus that supported Mussolini. After these topics concerning the nation receded in importance in the 1970s, Italian history opened itself widely to the contemporary currents in historical theory. Italian historians contributed significantly to developments in social history as well as that of cultural history. The historiographical mastery of the German catastrophe In Germany, the post-war historiographical debate occurred in a country that was judged by some to have arrived at the 0 hour in its history. Cities lay in ruins, industries were destroyed, people were starving, and the status of Germany had become a point of contention. For about 2 decades, German historians engaged in what is called the mastery of the past, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. The task was no less than to find continuity in a country that recently had experienced changes at the very basics of its national identity, and to do so without denying the enormous evil that was committed. Historiographically, the issue was one of continuity and discontinuity. Had the Nazi regime been a singular aberration, or the continuity and or the culmination of a long development? Historians inside and outside of Germany were drawn into the debate. Of the aberration views, the most popular one attributed all guilt to Hitler. Surprisingly, in this light, the first Hitler biography of substantial historical value appeared only in the year 1973 by Joachim Fest. In contrast, the focus rested on continuity in the view that all past German development had been on a course destined for catastrophe. However, the most widely accepted view located a misdirection of German development, either away from the Western Enlightenment or, in 1848, away from liberalism. German historiography had contributed to this development by its affirmation of historicism, its narrow national inspirations, and its attraction to power. The Sonderweg, or separate way, thesis offered a clear direction for the rebuilding of the shattered German state on a democratic basis by overcoming the break in continuity. At first, a moderate revisionism prevailed, in that the German tradition was found only partially at fault in the matter of Hitler. German society and attitudes were seen as particularly susceptible to the steady accumulation of power in the state and to the consequences of modernity's rejection of tradition, the destruction of values, and the isolation of the individual. Hitler made clever use of all of these circumstances and was favored by the popular resentments and fears of the revolution after World War I. And thus the German version of the demonic streak discerned in all societies could be unleashed. In Gerhard Ritter's Dämonie der Macht, post-1945 historians agreed here with the few German historians of the 1920s who had warned against the transformation of Röntgen's state as a moral institution into the Machtstaat, or a state governed primarily by power considerations. That change had to be condemned, but not the whole German tradition. Nazism was an aberration, a discontinuity not rooted in German society and its institutions. Gerhard Ritter, Hans Rothfuss, and Hans Herzfeld called for a much stronger moral component in German historiography, but not for its large-scale revision. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, attempts were made to rescue some continuity by differentiating between worthy and unworthy elements in the German tradition. Prominent figures in the attempt were Friedrich Meinecke and Gerhard Ritter. Meinecke pointed to the unresolved social questions, particularly the integration of the working class. In general, blame fell on Prussian militarism and the Prussian solution to German unity in 1871. Gerhard Ritter spoke out for the renewing history writing as a moral force. He did not doubt that this could be achieved by rescuing the positive elements of the German tradition. For that, he still saw in historicism, methodology, worldview, and all a fitting instrument once it was adjusted according to the experiences of the immediate past. And so, the mastery of the past, or Vergangenheitsbewältigung, continued in many different forms. The role of the post-World War I disappointments with the defeat and the Versailles Peace Treaty were key because they helped the rise of Hitler to power. Noting them, but not just justifying the actions of Adolf Hitler with them, brought some balance to the issue, as was indicated by Hans Rothfuss. Such a view served as a counterweight against those who pronounced verdicts of total German guilt, such as A.P.J. Taylor, or those pleading Germany's total innocence, David L. Hogan. But coping with the immediate past took less the form of a discussion of war guilt and more of a struggle for a new historical nexus between past, present, and the expectations for the future. This discussion preserved continuity without denying the enormity of what happened in the years between 1933 and 1945. In the context of that debate, the turn to social history would occur. The absence of a significant war guilt debate had as its reason the general agreement on Hitler and his regime's clear fault. The centrality of Hitler as the key agent of history gave whatever debate there was a marked historicist tinge. But the main attention soon shifted to Hitler's Reich as a system. There, questions concerning political, social, and economic structures entered, providing a spur to new developments in historical research and writing with social and cultural forces. In that connection, the question of what accounted for the turn away from liberal democracy in 1933 evoked much debate. One group of historians focused on the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic as a contributing element. Constitutional features, the electoral system, and the ideological party structure were cited as well. The role of anti-Semitism received increasing attention as well. Other scholars saw German liberalism handicapped in a state that had a tradition of relying on power and foreign policy for maintaining itself in an exposed central location. And again, we see questions concerning political history, social history, economic structures, and its history provided new developments in historical research and writing with social histories and cultural focuses. And new types of history as well. In the context of the general ferment and upheaval of the 1960s, challenges were mounted to traditional views of the German past. Fritz Fischer's Griff nach der Weltmacht, 1964, saw Hitler's military and foreign policies not as an exceptional but as a standing in a long tradition of expansionism. While his work was hardly path-breaking in historical theory, it nevertheless created an opening through which more radical revisions would pour. Particularly so, since at that time a whole generations of scholars came into their own who sympathized with innovative developments. A German social history was emerging. Some of its basic features would be the ranking of large-scale structural forces as historical causes over individual actions, the downgrading of biographies unless the individual lives were integrated into the social, economic, and political structures, the abandonment of the primacy of the political aspect of life, and the preference for viewing the state no longer as an organic whole in terms of Volk or nation, but as an institution within which conflicts were resolved. Reform-minded historians began to work in terms of social or structural history. Again, social histories and structural histories. They were in general agreement with the Annals school on history's duty in France to go beyond the faithful description of unique events and persons and to search for the larger forces which were at work, which account for the dynamics of societies and culture in civilizations. But the German historians developed their views primarily within the German intellectual tradition. After the year 1945, Volksgeschichte lost its key concept, that of Volk, and therefore it was only Geschichte, that of history. For centuries it had been a respectable word until the Third Reich misused the term, a misuse with horrible consequences. Thus the budding German social history became Strukturgeschichte. The controversy over the exact connection between the two forms of social history, Strukturgeschichte and Volksgeschichte, has not subsided even in recent years, although no direct link can be drawn. In their different ways, Werner Kantz, Theodor Scheider, Otto Hintz, and Otto Brunner provided the main works of Strukturgeschichte, or structural history. The horizon of the new social history, again, Strukturgeschichte, was implied by the term society, absorbing influences from sociology by Hans Freyer. Generalizations were part of Strukturgeschichte, although its themes were never far from national history. Structures were categories that helped to describe the web of connections in society. They remained suspended uneasily between real forces and typological means. Their historicist heritage also was not quite in step with the search for a social history with reformist intentions. In Strukturgeschichte, the economic, political, and social forces were interwoven as they fluctuated in influence, defying any hierarchical structure, in particular, reductionism. Accordingly, activist engagement was not promoted. Such distance of theory from practice was avoided in social histories with emancipatory intent. In many of them, the German Sonderweg in life and historiography was the result of the maladjustment between advanced economic developments and traditional social and political institutions. The theme of the stalled social and political evolution would be a major one for historians of the democratic left. Most prominent of the new varieties of social history was the Historische Sozialwissenschaft. Keenly theory conscious but eschewing grand theoretical schemes, it had combined many strains of historical methods and interpretations, particularly those of Max Weber and Marx. In characteristic contrast to the deliberate neglect of the political aspect by many scholars of the Annals school, the long-standing German concern was with the state as a coordinating institution, has made for an integration of political aspects of life into the new German social history. Also, the influence of the so-called Weber Renaissance has given new strength to the mental or conceptual structures never absent from most of German historiography, as history remained independent on Verstehen, or understanding, or a comprehension for the study of values or mental structures as important features. Social history as well was to be of substantial degree Begriffsgeschichte, or conceptual history. That feature contributed to the relative weakness of quantitative historiography, even after the year 1945. Other historians have not shared enthusiasm for a strong social science orientation. Those of the critical school found patterns worth emulating in the views of Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, who had returned to Germany after the year 1945 with a message directed against all interpretive schemes built on excessive rationality, scientific, progressive, etc. Such schemes dulled the emancipatory edge of historiography, as they ignored the element of a grand alienation in Western civilization. Overcoming the latter required constant critical assessments of that which exists, a liberation from all myths. Then, from the 1970s, two countercurrents to German social history made themselves felt. The first derived its strength from the growing distance from 1945 and its historiographical legacy. The historiographical focus shifted from coming to terms with the legacy of Hitler's regime to issues connected with the emergence of a new German republic, now clearly set apart from the recent past. Historical works reflected the building of the new German republic and its fitting historical nexus, the connection between the past, present, and expectations for the future. Again, that's the historical nexus, the connection between the past, present, and expectations for the future. In them, a widened conventional historiography was employed. Historicist elements appeared in the histories in biographical form, such as Konrad Adenauer and Karl Schumacher. New assessments of past statesmen yielded insights and helpful orientation, such as Bismarck biographies. The narrow confines in which German history had been viewed were widened to include the Europe and Atlantic community. Nationally accented and neo-historicist historians strove for a more balanced view of the Kaiserreich, stressed broad cultural differences in the development of Germany from that of other countries, rather than just one Sonderweg, and pointed to the historical consequences of Germany's central location in Europe. These historians, each in his or her own way, argued for viewing the German catastrophe not as the necessary outcome of past developments and decisions. What they considered to be a realistic historicism was preferred to a well-intentioned, structural, and partially determinist view. The Historikerstreit, literally, quarrel among historians. Historikerstreit was related to these historiographical revisions. This quarrel among historians originated in a re-evaluation of the horrendous events between 1933 and 1945. The central issue was the degree of uniqueness of Nazism, especially that of the phenomenon of the Holocaust. The facts and intrinsic evilness of the events of genocide were not in question. Their origin and position in modernity, however, was. Some historians, such as Ernst Nolte, Michael Sturmer, Andreas Hillgruber, and Klaus Hildebrand, interpreted Nazism as a reaction to and imitation of Bolshevism, with both movements sponsored by modernity's destruction of traditions and values. Critics prominent among them, Jürgen Habermas, attacked such views as an attempt to deprive the Holocaust of its unique horror and permanent cleansing effect on German society. For Drangunserwitz, an alternative social history, Alltagsgeschichte, or history of everyday life. Again, Alltagsgeschichte. Alltagsgeschichte. The history of everyday life aimed to replace the grand concepts that give structure to the Historische Sozialisierungswissenschaft and the annals, with empirical description of relationships, attitudes, and actions of the common people. That earned them much criticism for romanticizing the people and contributing to the deficit in historical theory that many had deplored for decades. Yet Alltagsgeschichte did engage indirectly in theory when its historians spoke of oppression, sought assistance from anthropology, especially the anthropology of Clifford Geertz, and advocated the decentering of history, that is, the negation of all unilinear developments, such as progress. Pioneers for the new perspective have been Alf Lutz Niethammer and Hans Medic. In the German Democratic Republic, the elaborate institutional apparatus for the study of history, academy, institutes, and universities, was centrally controlled by the communist leadership. Research was conducted along prescribed official themes selected for their support of the ideological struggle and intended to construct a German history along Marxist-Leninist lines. Limited openings for a less ideological historiography presented themselves in ancient and medieval history, as well as in social history. In the 1970s, a marked turn to German nationalism occurred. After the fall of the communist regime, little has remained of the once favored historiography and of the institutional structure in the German Democratic Republic.